This thinking tool is language, a slippery but inescapable thinking tool, mode of thought. Hard to think outside of language. And my goodness, do we have a challenge in front of us. Humanity loves to try and describe the inherently indescribable nature of the universe, try to pin it down with language, even as the universe constantly changes. So, what is language? Well, it's the principal method of human communication, consisting of words used in a structured and conventional way, conveyed by speech, writing, or gesture. Yeah, but like, what is language? What separates one from another? Well, the old quip is that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy, sometimes called the Weinreich witticism. It's a quip about the arbitrariness of the distinction between a dialect and a language, or variety, as they are sometimes called. So I think it's worth keeping in mind the idea of power here, what counts as one thing or another. Yeah, it might be a question of power. So, one of the main divides in linguistics, the study of language, is prescriptivism versus descriptivism. So, says that the purpose of linguistics is simply to describe how people use language. The idea here is that language doesn't exist to oppress us, it exists to promote the clarity of expression and communication. Prescriptivism says, no, we all need to use the language in a particular way so that we can actually have clarity of communication. And sometimes this goes as far as saying, well, Latin had six tenses, therefore English must have six tenses too. There's a right way of doing it, and we have to do it the right way. Otherwise, it all breaks down. These days, the balance tends to be in favor of descriptivism. For example, adjectives aren't a natural linguistic category. Many languages use verbs in that role. For example, there are descriptive verbs in Korean. The cat isn't fluffy, the cat fluffies in Korean. So once you start to look beyond the confines of your own language or your own language group, like Indo-European, you can start to see that there are many other ways of doing things, and they are perfectly functional. So Wittgenstein claims that one way of thinking about language is as a game. He starts off with the idea that there is no private language. It's not possible to develop a language in your head on your own. It has to be done in communion with other people. And as a result, language and culture are the water in which we swim. And so the way to think about language as a game is that although it's impossible to rigorously define a game or a language, it is identifiable through family resemblances. We can see other things that we would label a game or a language and say, okay, this thing is also like that. Under this idea, we can say that yes, words do actually mean things, but only within a particular discourse game. And other people are under no obligation to play the same game as you. If they want to use words in another way for another purpose, you can't like force them to. That would be linguistic prescriptivism. However, if you want to play the game of actually understanding each other or making the world a better place, it does help to play by shared rules. For example, someone might try and play the homophone game. Well, there's the idea of rock in music and rock in geology, or rock an actor, and we can insist that there must be a connection between these concepts because they use the same word. And it's like, okay, what about the act of making something go back and forth, like a boat on the water? Do we have to insist that that also has some connected meaning? You can do this. That is a language game you can play, but why? To what end? I don't think that actually helps understand each other or make the world a better place. It's just saying, look at this neat feature of English, because this doesn't work in French or another language. Yeah. Another thing to keep in mind is that language changes. So language changes over time as words shift through layers of abstraction and chains of analogy. Um, some people think that's very important to like uncover those chains because finding out the original meaning is somehow liberatory. Um, I don't think that's necessarily true. But here's some examples. So, for example, sometimes we taboo words. So the English word bear originally comes from a proto word that means something like the brown one, because the original word for bear was thought to actually summon a bear, and so they stopped saying it. So they said, okay, watch out for the brown ones. Um, then there's a semantic drift where a word will just slowly change meaning over time. Classic example here is something like the word awesome. Like these days, that means, yeah, that's somewhat interesting. It is uh, viewed favorably, but one of its older meanings was it was literally being filled with awe, the overwhelming sense of the transcendent or sublime nature of some aspect of the universe. Then there's slang and substitution. The main types of language change are sound changes, phonological, vocabulary changes, lexical, meaning changes, semantic, and grammatical changes, syntactic. Other categories include spelling changes, morphological changes, which involve alterations to word structure. So yeah, like there are spelling reform attempts, like American English dropped a bunch of U's, and British and Canadian English tends to have those U's, like in the word color, for example. Uh, Sticking with the semantic meaning, we can notice that the meaning of words change over time. For example, through the process of appropriation. That's the adoption from minority communities or specialized communities like medicine by a dominant group, usually without proper acknowledgement or respect. That can be followed up with reappropriation, reclaiming a term to neutralize its negative power. This might be an example, might be like the reclaiming of the word queer by the queer community. And then there's the attempts to just invent entirely new terminology as neologisms. Probably mispronounced that. So these acts form the political battlefield in which in the struggle for hearts and minds. Now, consider words like progress or free speech or woke or gaslighting or libertarian. These words had particular understandings within particular discourse communities, and they got appropriated or reappropriated or reimagined, and uh, sometimes wholly invented, and their meaning changes. So we can see that there is a process of what we can call semantic drift, which is often caused by those above processes, appropriation, reappropriation, and so on. And this includes, a euphemism treadmill. Terms can become pejorative, or then it can become later can become renormalized, usually through the process of slang. Another factor to complexify the landscape is the power of labeling languages. So the use of the word man, for example, to mean all of humanity is ubiquitous within English. And yes, it should make non-men a little bit concerned. Or labels like slave to describe an enslaved person, or prisoner for someone who is incarcerated, or victim for someone who's been victimized. The idea here is that turning someone's oppression or situation into a label is forcing an identity onto them. And we'll discuss identity in later video. The power of labeling language is an example of the broader power of language to shape our thought. This is sometimes called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So, the idea of linguistic relativity, otherwise known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, is the principle suggesting that the structure of a language influences its speaker's worldview or cognition, and thus individuals' languages determine or influence their perceptions of the world. So learning another language is like becoming another person. There are stronger and weaker versions of this. Like the strong version of the claim is that For example, when Columbus came to the New World, in air quotes here, the people already living there could not see his ships because they didn't have ships. They had no word for those sort of ships, and so they were unable to actually see them. That is not true. One, they had boats. Two, they had eyes. No, they were perfectly able to see them, even if they weren't necessarily had language for those types of rigged sailed boats. But the weak version, where it influences the words available to you influence your thought, does have some legs. So, for example, a monolingual German speaker will tend to describe an action, but also the goal of an action. So they would tend to say, a woman walks towards her car, or a man cycles towards the supermarket. English monolingual speaker would simply describe those scenes as a woman is walking or a man is cycling without mentioning the goal. The worldview assumed by German speakers is a holistic one. They tend to look at the event as a whole, whereas English speakers tend to zoom in on the event and focus only on the action. Um, Neither is correct or wrong. They're just different ways of situating yourself, different aspects to focus on. Do you contextualize or do you decouple? The linguistic basis of this tendency appears to be rooted in the way different grammatical toolkits situate actions in time. English requires its speakers to grammatically mark events that are ongoing by obligatorily applying the ing morpheme. I am playing the piano and I cannot come to the phone, or I was playing the piano when the phone rang. German does not have this feature. The structure of language affects how we think about things. That power is not absolute, but it is pervasive. Just another example quickly here. There are certain languages that have as a feature called evidentiality. It's not possible to create a grammatical sentence in those languages without also denoting how you know or what evidence you are basing your claim on. For example, you have to end the sentence with an ending that means something like I saw it, or I heard it, or I was told by a friend, or it is, I can deduce it from existing facts. And those languages tend to have effects on how people think about the world. The classic example is here is Piraha, which is an Amazonian language that has very low what we would call religiosity. Is that related? It seems at least plausible. So what are the limits of language? So Wittgenstein also asserted that the limits of language mean the limits of my world, which again is somewhat related to the earlier idea of linguistic relativity. So his famous concluding line from the Tractatus, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent. It reflects his view that the limits of one's language are the limits of one's world, and that matters beyond the realm of significant speakable language, like ethics, aesthetics, or the ineffable, must be acknowledged by silence rather than attempted verbal articulation. Or we can try and create new language. I think there's a number of other language-related phenomenon that are briefly worth mentioning. For example, normative determinism. A person's name has a statistically significant chance of influencing their future career. Not a big chance, but a measurable one. So if your name is Smith, there is a measurable chance increased chance that you will go into something like metalworking. Another phenomenon worth mentioning is algospeak, which is the use of coded languages, misspellings, and alternative symbols to bypass automated content moderation systems. Things like saying unalived instead of killed. Another phenomenon is the royal order of adjectives, the rule where adjectives must go opinion, size, age, color, origin, purpose, such that a beautiful little antique blue Italian hunting cap is fine, but an Italian hunting blue little antique beautiful cap is almost gibberish. We don't even notice these sorts of things sometimes. And there's also a difference between following the rules of communication versus actually communicating successfully. Uh, for example, the sentence, colorless green dreams sleep furiously, is grammatically correct, but it contains no information. No communication has successfully happened. So in this thinking tool, we described what a language is, arguably, a dialect with an army and a navy, the divide between descriptivism and prescriptivism, language as a game, various forms of language change, the power of labeling language, and the general power of language with linguistic relativity, the limits of language, and some other language phenomena. All right.